12 survivors were divided into 6 teams. Each pair was dropped into the extremely cold Norwegian Arctic. Here, they had to build shelters, find food, and be constantly on guard against unexpected incidents. Whether they were siblings or romantic couples, they could fall apart at any moment under these conditions. The team that lasted until the end would win a cash prize of $500,000. Riding in self-assembled dinghies, the participants were dropped off at their respective starting points. The first to appear was a young woman named Danielle. It was her first time here, filling her with both nervousness and excitement. She found a decent flat piece of land by the shore where she had to build a shelter within 2 days, or her boyfriend would have nowhere to stay when he arrived. Meanwhile, Danielle's boyfriend, Patrick, was trekking 10 kilometers away, carrying a 50-kilogram backpack, struggling to breathe. As the only young couple in the competition, both expressed great confidence in their survival. Before officially entering the competition, Danielle was a full-time flight attendant, and she had been dating Patrick for 2.5 years. Patrick, with over a decade of deep-sea diving experience, was no stranger to wilderness survival. They joined the competition, hoping to win enough money to buy their own house. After only walking a few kilometers, Patrick was already too exhausted to stand, soaking wet. After appreciating the beautiful scenery around him, he began to use his compass to confirm his direction. Meanwhile, Danielle started building the shelter, simply pulling a rope for a crossbeam and covering it with a waterproof tarp. Once she secured all 4 corners, the shelter was complete. The second pair to appear was a sister duo. Martha, the older sister, was responsible for setting up the camp on site, while Camilla ventured further afield. Shortly after landing, Martha found wild blueberries on the ground. Although not plentiful, they were enough for dinner. Her only fear was not having enough food when her sister arrived. Continuing towards the woods, she discovered a wild stream and drank heartily. Considering there was both water and food, Martha decided to establish the camp there. Back in Norway, the sisters ran an organic food wholesale business, sustaining themselves by selling fresh vegetables. Living together year-round, they had a strong understanding of each other. Hoping to win the prize money to expand their vegetable market, the sisters were filled with anticipation for the competition. After landing, Camilla felt the nature around her for a moment before starting to walk towards her sister. The third duo to appear was a pair of brothers. EMLL, the elder, took on the task of hiking. He hadn't walked far when he spotted a wild frog. As newcomers to the competition, he hadn't realized the importance of protein and hastily let it go. Meanwhile, his younger brother Nicholas had just landed, completely unaware of the wilderness's harshness. He quickly adjusted his mood and set out to build a shelter. Before the competition, the brothers had a grand dream of cycling around the world. Unfortunately, due to a lack of funds, they had never even left their small hometown. Additionally, maintaining their bicycles was a significant expense. Thus, their sole goal in the competition was to win the prize money to fulfill their dream. Nicholas found a relatively flat area and laid down a waterproof tarp. He then cut down a small tree nearby to use as a support, creating a simple wilderness shelter. On the other side, EMLL was making good time to reunite with his brother. Carrying a heavy backpack, he walked for over 3 hours without rest until he reached a mountain spring. After drinking a few sips of cool water, EMLL felt re-energized and continued on his way. Upon meeting up with Nicholas, who had set up a temporary shelter, EMLL, without even stopping for lunch, began constructing a more robust wilderness cabin. The piece of tarp on the ground was not enough for both brothers to sleep on. He found a spot with less wind and started sawing logs. With great vigor, he quickly erected a conical frame. Turning to the couple's team, Patrick, while his girlfriend was at the camp enjoying tea and the scenery, was struggling with exhaustion. He soon encountered a fast-flowing river blocking his path. Lacking the courage to cross directly, he searched for a shallower part along the riverbank and cautiously moved forward with a walking stick. Using his weight advantage, Patrick eventually made it to the other side, though he had to return later to retrieve his camera. Meanwhile, Danielle was preparing their sleeping area at the camp to avoid discomfort from the ground stones. She made the ground very smooth and then went outside with an iron pot to gather all the visible blueberries, ensuring there was something for Patrick to eat upon his arrival, to avoid any complaints. At Nicholas's duo camp, today he plans to set up the fishing net first, since fish is the easiest food to get here. He carefully brings the net to the lake. Having trained only 5 days before the contest, he's still a novice at this. By the time he's done, it's nearly afternoon. Now he just hopes for a big catch tomorrow morning. At the sisters' camp, Martha. Unable to bear her hunger, she heads to the shore to fish. As time passes, it gradually gets darker. Realizing that waiting like this isn't working, Martha secures several fish hooks at the shore and decides to check again tomorrow. As dusk approaches, the hikers start pitching their tents, just for a simple overnight stay, so the accommodations are not elaborate. At Patrick's camp, he's sleeping soundly in the middle of the night when suddenly he sees someone standing in front of him. He almost has a heart attack from the fright, but upon closer inspection, it's just his drying pants. Even Patrick laughs at this midnight scare. Day 3. Nicholas can't wait to check his fishing net. Initially having little hope, he quickly pulls up a small fish and then several more follow. Overjoyed, he catches 6 wild fish in total and hurries back to camp to cook them. After boiling them vigorously for several minutes, he makes a simple fish broth and eagerly tastes it, gaining much-needed energy. He doesn't even spare the oil on the lid, licking it clean. Back at Martha's camp. She checks the fish hooks she set up the previous day, but only catches a small fish. Although it's hardly enough even as a snack, finding any food in the wilderness is still impressive. After cleaning the fish, she brings it back to camp for her sister. She also picks lots of wild mushrooms, planning a big meal with her sister. Meanwhile, Camilla is exhausted from continuous hiking, with a blister on her foot. After a brief rest, she resumes her journey. Not knowing how long she's walked, Camilla finally finds her sister's camp. Hearing a clicking sound nearby, Martha responds, surprised at her sister's speedy arrival. They shout to each other and walk towards the sound, eventually meeting in a small grove. Hearing that her sister has cooked fish, Camilla runs to the camp. Once together, the sisters have endless conversations. After a short break, they prepared to set up the fishing net. Since Martha's sister was a complete novice, Martha had to work hard to teach her. After over half an hour of arguing, they assigned tasks and reached the lake. It took most of the day, but they finally set up the fishing net. Then, they sat by the lake, catching up on old times. At Patrick's camp, he hadn't walked long before he stopped to admire a beautiful scene. Suddenly, a herd of 14 reindeer ran across a distant hillside, one particularly large one staring from afar. Alone outside, encountering this was rare for Patrick, who had no thoughts of hunting. He marveled at the sight of nature, then shouldered his large backpack and continued up the ridge. Reaching the summit, he saw a lake where he expected to find his girlfriend, Danielle. Energized by the thought, he quickly reached a small grove and started calling out to her. Danielle, hearing well, responded soon. Knowing each other's locations, they hurried towards each other and met, overwhelmed with joy. Seeing the large bed Danielle had prepared, Patrick was delighted. Then, they cooperated to set up the fishing net. Meanwhile, Emil climbed hundreds of meters up the ridge but was blocked by a swamp. Taking a detour seemed impractical, so he bravely pushed forward. Luckily, the mud wasn't deep, and he soon reached the other side, albeit with worn-out shoes. He believed it wouldn't be long before he and his brother met. At the same time, Nicholas was building a shelter. Considering both were tall, at over 6 feet, the shelter needed to be appropriately sized. A comfortable single bed was also planned. Suddenly, Nicholas heard his brother calling and quickly ran up to the summit. Surprisingly, Emil had already completed his task. The brothers greeted each other excitedly. Nicholas then briefed him on the campsite. With only one bed, their priority was to set up the camp before dark. After 2.5 hours of hard work, their warm and comfortable shelter was ready. Now, with a brother and a fire, nothing could be more pleasant. The 4th contestant named Anne just landed, shivering with fear. It was her first time in such a competition, which would make anyone nervous. She pulled out a deceitful map and a compass from her pocket. Anne's task was to hike 12 kilometers within 4 days to meet her husband, Bjorn, on the other side. After quickly determining the direction, she put on her 50-kilogram backpack and set off. Meanwhile, Bjorn had already reached the shore. After a brief survey of the surroundings, he decided to build the shelter there. He collected a dead wood for the crossbeam and then covered it with a tarp, completing a simple melon shelter. Before the official competition, the couple managed a farm and lived in the suburbs, where their keen interest in hunting developed. They often went hunting with guns. An, having served as a volunteer soldier for 2.5 years, was much stronger and smarter than Bjorn. giving them great confidence to persevere to the end. Next up was a father-son duo. Carl, at 65, robustly joined the competition. For him, who had never used a smartphone, handling complex filming equipment was challenging. Due to his age, the hiking task naturally fell to his son. It was the first time 18-year-old Mark had left his family for the wilderness. Before leaving, the directors kindly taught him to read a map and arrange the simplest routes for him. Meanwhile, his father quickly set up the shelter at the lake. The warm sunshine, however, forced him to lie down and rest. Back home in Norway, Carl was quite the primitive man, his fierce look revealing his exceptional survival skills. Now that his son was grown, to foster his independence, Carl had signed them up for the competition. Winning the prize money was not important. His son's healthy survival was all that mattered. Mark had not walked far when the path turned muddy. Struggling out of the swamp, he was dismayed to find his new shoes ruined. The last contestant to appear was named Casper. His landing spot was decent, surrounded by mountains, water, and forests. He quickly set up a shelter nearby and even started a campfire. Without the company of a phone or computer, he could only sit and pass the time meditating. At this moment, he missed his friend Victor, who was on the other side. As the only contestant with a physical advantage this season, Victor faced a significant challenge hiking and had to rest shortly after starting. Before the official competition, Caspar and Victor were childhood friends. Years of friendship led them to live and work together. Their only notable skills were fishing and gathering herbs. They knew each other's strengths well and believed they could win the championship unless something unexpected occurred. However, shortly after Victor started, mosquitoes quickly targeted him. They could even bite through his clothes. After briefly checking his direction, he quickly shouldered his luggage and set off. When he came to where Anne, the wife in the couple's team, was located, she was already exhausted from walking miles. Her throat was so dry it almost smoked. Fortunately, she heard the sound of water nearby. Indeed, a rushing river blocked her path, which excited her. She quickly pulled out a cup and drank heartily. Considering it would be dark in 2 hours, Anne decided to spend the night there. Meanwhile, other hiking contestants began setting up their camps. Victor, exhausted due to his physique, could only lie in his tent and sleep soundly. Worried about not finding water on the way, he placed an iron pot on the ground to collect rainwater. On the third day, the father-son team, Carl, surprisingly caught 14 fish in the early morning and even brewed himself a pot of leaf tea. Caspar decided to set up his fishing net early to catch fish. He carried his gear to the lakeside and quickly entered the water. With his skilled swimming, he set up the fishing net in no time. At this moment, his friend Victor had just woken up from his tent and gulped down some rainwater he collected the night before. Facing the high mountains ahead without sufficient food and water, he considered giving up for the first time. Back to Anne, she became unusually excited when she walked onto a plain and spotted an old moose staring at her. The moose was large and fat. If she had a bow and arrow and the courage, the championship could have been hers. Unfortunately, she could only watch it leave. After briefly admiring the beautiful scenery around her, Anne did not dare to stay long and set off again. After an unknown period of walking, she finally saw her husband's location. However, to reach there, she had to go around a lake, turning what would have been a day's journey into 2 days. Not wanting to use up too much energy, Anne decided to rest there for the night. After all, her feet were already wrinkled. At Victor's side, as he ventured further, the path became more rugged. Victor studied the map for most of the day, but was clueless about how to bypass the obstacle. His initial excitement quickly faded, and he simply lay down on a clear spot. Having not consumed any protein for 3 days and stuck in place, he felt like quitting. It was uncertain how much longer he could hold on. At Carl's side, while grilling fish at noon in his camp, Carl suddenly heard noises from the bushes. Turning around, he realized his son had traveled far to see him. There was no hug upon meeting, likely due to his son's exhaustion. Quickly, Carl served the cooked fish, and they sat down to feast on the ground, enjoying the meal. After a brief half-hour rest, Carl and his son went fishing by the lake. At Anne's side, after packing up in the morning, Anne prepared to cross the large river in front of her before the weather turned. She entered the river with the help of a cane and nearly slipped into the water. Thankfully, the river wasn't deep, and she reached the other side quickly. She didn't rest upon landing, but headed straight towards her husband's location. Upon hearing her call, Bjorn, who was sleeping in the camp, rushed out to check. The couple successfully met in the small woods and hurried back to camp to rest. Thankfully, Bjorn had prepared some fish, which they eagerly devoured. At the friends, Kaspar's side, today was the day to check the fishing nets. Eager, Kasper went to the lake. As he began to pull up the net, he caught his first small fish. Incredibly, as he pulled more, he found more fish. Within just a few minutes, he had caught 9 large small fish, enjoying remarkable luck. After gutting them at the lake, he was ready to share the meal with his friend. Meanwhile, Victor, after 2 days of tough trekking, finally crossed the high mountain. As dusk fell, he set up his tent to rest for the night. On the 5th day, Kaspar, while chopping trees at the camp, suddenly heard his teammates shout. The moment he saw his friend alive, both were incredibly excited and met successfully by the lake. At the father-son duo's side, under Carl's instruction, they decided to build a larger camp. They began by tying a horizontal beam to the tree trunks, then found 2 branches to cross and secure. Finally, they fortified the windbreak walls with more branches and covered them with a waterproof cloth, completing the shelter. Due to the son being pampered, he chopped wood for the first time and accidentally struck his own hand with the axe. Blood gushed out immediately. Although they initially thought a bandage from the first aid kit would suffice, the father, prioritizing his son's safety, insisted he call for help. A speedboat arrived swiftly, and after examining the wound, the doctor stated that hospital treatment was necessary. This meant both had to quit the competition. Hearing this, the father suppressed his anger, reluctantly accepting the situation. It was his own negligence that had caused the injury, and ultimately they had no choice but to pack up and head home. On the 6th day, the Nicholas brothers woke up in their tent, pleased with the shelter they had worked hard to build. Considering they always struggled with smoke when lighting a fire, they decided to build a chimney at the campsite that day. After marking the spot, they cut an opening in the waterproof cloth with a knife and surrounded it with stone slabs. Within half an hour, a proper fireplace was completed. However, the smoke could still only exit through the door, quickly engulfing the entire campsite. Nicholas, who went in to add wood, was nearly overcome by the smoke. They had to extinguish the campfire and think of another solution if they wanted to rest properly. Over at the friends group with Victor, after a brief discussion about the day's plans, they decided to rearrange the fishing nets. Lacking suitable tools to enter the water, they tied stones to the rope and threw it towards the opposite bank numerous times. Seeing that Nicholas was unreliable, Emil had to cross to the other side first to retrieve the rope. After much effort and pulling from both sides, they finally managed to set up the fishing net, hoping for a feast the next day after 5 days of hunger. At the couple's camp, they had spent the previous day expanding their shelter, mainly using physical labor. Fortunately, they had already set up the fishing nets the day before. Both took a rope to the lakeside, with boyfriend Patrick leading the effort. As they slowly pulled the fishing net ashore, a large trout appeared, followed by a second catch. They were thrilled and immediately took them back to the camp to enjoy the delicious meal, satisfying their protein needs for the first time in 5 days. Translation for the sisters' duo. So far, they have not worried about food. The urgent task is to reinforce their shelter. They chopped one small tree after another nearby, setting up the basic framework of the house. They also needed to reinforce it with branches. Once the entire roof was covered with branches, they laid the versatile waterproof cloth over it. The excess wood was not wasted. It was used as firewood. With the final wall secured, their deluxe wilderness melon guard shack was completed, perfectly suitable for the daily life of the 2 sisters. After finishing, Martha did not rest but decided to gather some herbs nearby. She managed to collect a little and planned to make tea for her sister that evening on the 7th day. Translation for the couple, Anne and Bjorn. Today they had an important task, to get fish by any means. They had planned to build a boat days earlier to set fishing nets in the center of the lake. The construction was simple. Sticks were tied to a frame, which was then wrapped tightly with waterproof cloth. Once prepared, Bjorn set off in the small boat. He first retrieved the fishing net set the day before, which surprisingly caught nothing. Just as they were about to return home hungry, another net showed activity. A slightly larger fish surfaced, exciting Anne. They quickly retrieved it with the net. Though not as big as expected, it was enough to keep them from going hungry that night. With energy replenished, the couple decided it was time to build a permanent shelter. as staying in a tent was too cramped even for sleeping. Translation for the couple, Patrick and Danielle. Both were very hungry. To catch fish, Patrick suggested building a fishing platform right outside their home, which would make fishing and setting nets very convenient. However, his idea was quickly rejected by his girlfriend. Patrick proposed several other methods, but none satisfied her. Helpless, Patrick could only worry. Later, too hungry to wait, they checked the old fishing nets and were lucky to catch 3 small fish. While too small to be substantial, having any food was fortunate. Then, Danielle volunteered to set nets in another location. When they arrived, not wanting to get their clothes wet, Patrick tried unsuccessfully to enter the water from the shore because his boots were too short. So they sat by the shore for a long time, finally deciding to throw the net to the opposite bank using stones. Translation for the brothers duo. Today, their task is still to build the chimney. They started by estimating the height with a few tree trunks. After some thought, they covered the inside with bacon. They worked all afternoon and finally built a man-high giant chimney. Without further ado, they started a campfire to test it out. However, after waiting for over 10 minutes, no smoke came out. To ensure a peaceful sleep tonight, they had to cut the waterproof fabric around the chimney to let the smoke escape. Translation for Victor. The two still do not have a proper shelter. They found a crooked old tree to support their lean-to, cleaned off the excess branches, and placed some logs on top. Due to the varying lengths of wood, there was little progress for half the day, causing them to blame each other. After 2.5 hours, they finally built the frame. Just as they were about to cover it with waterproof fabric, they realized it was too short. Thinking it over, they decided to saw off the extra wood. Just then, Victor almost fell, but was quickly caught by his teammate. Together, they successfully wrapped the shelter in waterproof fabric. Just then, a strong wind blew as they were packing to move into their new home. Upon arrival, they found the house nearly blown away, making it uncertain if they could sleep there tonight. Translation for the couple. Today was another day for fishing. Perhaps due to the location, they caught nothing again. So they decided to go to the southern waters near the shelter and set up their fishing nets from the boat. Translation for Nicholas and his brother. This morning, while out for a walk, Nicholas stumbled upon a straight bamboo pole. He decided to make a fishing rod from it, wrapping the broken parts with tape from the first aid kit. He then cut off the metal rings from the waterproof fabric and taped them to the bamboo pole, not forgetting the reel. With his equipment ready, he hurried to the lake. His first cast went smoothly thanks to the elasticity of the bamboo, but his laughter quickly faded when the fishing rod broke in 2 on the second cast. His brother couldn't help but laugh at the sight. Translation for the sisters duo. While other contestants were still worried about fish, the sisters easily caught a big one. Coincidentally, on the younger sister's birthday. Perfect for a feast. After retrieving all their fishing nets, they successfully caught 4 or 5 wild trout. Meanwhile, Caspar also had good luck, catching 8 proteins and bringing them back to camp to roast over a big fire. By the 10th day, the Nicholas brothers finally moved out the fireplace. They connected the previous smoke duct to the stovetop, allowing them to feel the warmth inside each time they lit a fire outside. After completing the setup, they quickly brewed a pot of berry tea. Over at Caspar's side, a strong wind last night nearly froze them to death. So today's main task was building the fireplace. Even with such a simple task, they began to slack and blame each other. They struggled to build the foundation with bacon, then propped up the basic frame with branches and covered it with mud for sealing. They estimated this smoke map would work great. By the 12th day, 5 teams remained. The Nicholas brothers got up early, still checking their fishing nets. At the first net, they easily pulled up 5 small fish. Without time to cheer, they hurried to the next location, finding the second net also full of fish, and unsurprisingly secured 10 proteins. They quickly returned to camp to enjoy a big meal. The couple also came to check their nets, and unexpectedly, there seemed to be a big one underwater, exciting them so much they danced around. However, as they tried to pull it ashore, the big fish escaped right before their eyes, a blow anyone would find hard to accept. After retrieving the rest of the nets, they only got 2 small fish, but the worst part was the big fish had damaged the net, a devastating blow for them. They estimated it would take 2.5 days just to repair the net. Over at the couple, A&N's side, They had been building a shelter for the past few days, a time-consuming and strenuous task. By the 10th day, they had already built the fireplace, and now they hurried to erect the walls. Without sufficient food reserves, they often had to sit down and rest for half the day. With each log placed, the rough outline of the wilderness cabin was nearly complete. Finally, they laid the waterproof fabric on top and went straight to sleep at the camp. At the friends group, Kaspar's side, after 2 days of hard work, the entire fireplace was finally completed, seemingly effective. Unfortunately, there were too many gaps around the fireplace, risking freezing if the wind blew at night. So, they had to wrap the fireplace with a waterproof fabric, wondering if it might catch fire. To test the smoke exhaust, Kaspar immediately started a fire. However, before his friend could close the door, thick smoke almost suffocated him. It was unexpected that the painstakingly built fireplace did not ventilate properly, which was a hard blow for both to accept, instantly ruining their mood. Over at the sisters' duo, they decided to tidy up the camp furniture today. They had found a plank days ago, which Martha quickly turned into a shelf, making items easily accessible and significantly tidying up the camp. Their dinner was equally impressive, cooking 2 delicious trout until golden brown on both sides, offering a crispy outside and tender inside taste. On day 14, Patrick found a suitable fishing spot, but had to cross a swamp to set the nets without wetting his clothes. He decided to chop a few trees to use as a makeshift bridge. Just 2 or 3 logs were enough. After setting it up, he quickly brought his girlfriend to test the bridge, and fortunately, they safely reached the other side. By the time they set up the nets, it was nearly afternoon, and they had 3 small fish for dinner. At the Nicholas brothers' side, considering the increasingly cold weather, they decided to reinforce the shelter walls. They first stuffed a bunch of branches inside for support, then went outside to collect moss to lay on the tent, which greatly enhanced the camp's insulation. After all this, the brothers were so exhausted that they fell asleep within minutes of lying down. At the couple's side, according to Anne, today was their first wedding anniversary. To celebrate, they decided to climb the mountain behind them to enjoy the view, packing a large bag of blueberries to pick berries while hiking. Not long after setting off, they spotted a moose on a distant slope, a visible but uncatchable source of protein. They had to keep moving forward with a calm mindset. The mountain path was rugged, forcing them to rest frequently. After drinking some clean, sanitary spring water, they continued on their journey. After 2.5 hours of tough trekking, the couple finally reached the summit. The suddenly clear view gave them the confidence to keep going. At the couple's camp, since the previously built fire pit wasn't generating enough heat, they planned to dismantle it and rebuild. However, before starting, Danielle expressed that the method wouldn't work. Wanting to avoid an argument, Patrick went outside to find new stones. As he brought back large stones one by one, Danielle started to rebuild the fire pit. When Patrick returned, he was pleased to see her successful work, which brightened his previously disappointed mood. Afterwards, they divided tasks. Danielle went to gather berries, while Patrick looked for soft moss to lay on their bed. Over at Camilla and Martha's camp, to ensure comfort in their daily rest, Camilla decided to build a proper double bed. However, she soon felt dizzy and saw stars, likely due to low blood sugar. Realizing that working alone was too slow, Martha came over and helped finalize the bed's frame, then covered it with a layer of branches, quickly making a warm and comfortable double bed. As darkness fell, they hurriedly lay down and fell asleep. On day 15, the situation at Kaspar and Victor's camp was bleak, as they had not caught fish for 2 days, surviving mostly on berries. When they checked the fishing nets at the lake again and found no catch, they both found a secluded spot to vent their frustrations on camera. Their long-standing friendship made it awkward to suggest quitting the competition. However, by day 16, as a speedboat zoomed across the lake, they finally made the call to withdraw from the competition. They claimed it wasn't due to the lack of food, but rather their longing for family. Despite not winning, their friendship deepened significantly. Regretfully, they packed up and left the competition. On day 17, 4 teams remained. After a night of rain, Danielle's dwelling was almost completely soaked, spoiling their good spirits. Seeing the big hole they had left in the roof, Danielle and Patrick decided to cover it with a waterproof tarp. However, the continuous cold wind made them shiver. Danielle was so cold she was reluctant to help. Eventually, they managed to cover the roof using sticks. At noon, Their check on the fishing nets again came up empty, forcing them to huddle in the camp, hungry. At the Nicholas brothers' camp, seeing the worsening weather, they took out waterproof bags to cover the roof. This ensured that, whether it was windy or rainy, the inside of the camp remained dry.